What's up, Jack? I'm Tyler Horka. That is Jack Sobel. Obviously, you guys are Notre Dame fans, and you're here to hear us talk about where the Fighting Irish are at their bye week, 4-1. Obviously, a huge win over Louisville this past Saturday. But Jack, outside of Notre Dame beating Louisville or Notre Dame losing to Northern Illinois, or maybe anyone else that the Irish might lose to the rest of the season to maybe do away with their college football playoff hopes, the biggest Notre Dame football news that could have happened sometime this fall just happened within the last hour. Deuce Knight, Notre Dame's highly recruited, vaunted, all of the adjectives that you want to use to describe him, the kid out of Mississippi. He has finally decommitted from Notre Dame. He's been a long time commit. Obviously, it's in the story there at blueandgold.com. Our Mike Singer and Kyle Kelly have done a phenomenal job in the aftermath of this. And again, this is immediate aftermath. And who better to bring on in the immediate aftermath than our own Kyle Kelly? You guys know who he is. He has a recruiting show with Mike every Thursday, I believe it is. You see him on our channel all the time. You see him at blueandgold.com. Kyle, does it feel like a bye week, man? There is no such thing as a bye week, right?
No, we would be mistaking ourselves if that was the case. And this has been the biggest recruiting week of the season, starting with a commitment yesterday that kind of came out of nowhere as a complete surprise. Notre Dame picking up a wide receiver commit from Georgia. And then today they lose their longtime quarterback commit from the South. And we heard some rumblings earlier today that it might finally come to a head. Turns out it did. Right about 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, Deuce Knight is on to Auburn, and Notre Dame is on to moving on 2025 for a new quarterback commit.
All right, very specific with the time, Kyle. So now I'm going to ask you the specifics about why this is on October 2nd as we record this. Why now? This has been a saga for a long time, quite frankly. A lot of people have thought he was going to flip to Auburn months ago. Why now?
Yeah, it's been a saga indeed. I don't think I've ever covered a recruitment like this. The one that kind of comes to mind is pretty much the one that I covered in the 2023 cycle with Peyton Bowen, who ultimately flipped to Oklahoma just before the signing window closed in December of that cycle. This was kind of similar to that, and the fact that Deuce Knight made a number of opposing visits, and they were to Auburn starting in July, where he made a secret visit that kind of went unreported. He had told me, and sources had told Mike Singer that visit was never going to occur to Auburn at the end of July. It ended up taking place. Auburn gained a lot of momentum on that visit, was never able to flip him. But what they were able to do was get him on campus for 4 of their 5 home games this season, which is pretty remarkable to see a team have 5 consecutive home games to start the season. You don't really see that. But Auburn did have that in their corner, and that ultimately was what was able to get Deuce Knight into the fold, because he visited for 4 of those games, and the most recent one being an official visit, which occurred last weekend for the Oklahoma game. And I think it kind of got to the point where Auburn, I wouldn't say gave Deuce Knight an ultimatum, because I think they always left the door open that if Deuce Knight wanted in the class, he was going to have a spot as long as they needed a quarterback. But Auburn had begun looking at other options in the 2025 cycle, whether that be Julian Lewis, the USC commit, who they had been rumored, or not even rumored, who had been reported interested in a few months ago back in the summer, but he made a secret visit to campus last week, according to our Auburn site. They've done some background work on Luke Nickel, the quarterback commit from Miami of Florida. So I think it was kind of Deuce, it's now or never. We're really going to start upping up, or kind of the uptick with other guys. And I think that might ultimately have been what kind of put Deuce Knight over the edge and ball in his court, and he decided to take it in favor of Auburn, ultimately flipping to Hugh Freeze's program today.
So my gut reaction, initial reaction is this helps Notre Dame as opposed to it being a leave Notre Dame at the altar type of situation, right? Like either he leaves now and Notre Dame has a couple months to do something about it, or Notre Dame gets so deep in the woods and thinking that maybe he could stay. Because correct me if I'm wrong, Kyle, some of the things that we were reading before this last Auburn visit, maybe it was getting closer to back to 50-50. If you thought it was like 80-20 Auburn or even 90-10, it got closer to 50-50. And then obviously this happens. But if it was 50-50 in December, that would have been a bad thing for Notre Dame. Now it's over in October. So what do the Irish do about this now? Where do they go with quarterback recruiting in the class of 2025?
Well, I think that, you don't want to say Notre Dame was planning for a Deuce Knight decommitment, but they were doing a lot of work behind the scenes. I would even put it extensive work on 2025 quarterbacks. I think there are a few names that they really like. And I expect within the next few weeks, some of those names will emerge and be publicized, whether that's quarterbacks in the 25 class reporting offers, or if that's Marcus Freeman or Chad Bowden or Gino Gaduli or Mike Denbrock making it out to one of those games for the Notre Dame's new batch of 25 quarterback targets. So Notre Dame has had a contingency plan here. Now, don't get me wrong. They fought tooth and nail to keep Deuce Knight in the class. They were hoping to get him up on campus for the Stanford game on October 12th. I think that was sort of the expectation that he was going to get back to campus. Now, obviously, with him flipping Auburn, I would definitely not expect Deuce Knight to be back at Notre Dame for what would have been his 11th visit to Notre Dame. Pretty much spent the whole month of June on campus. But they have their guys, and I expect them to make a move. Obviously, they want to sign one. They want to take one in the 25 class as far as we know. And here's the other thing worth mentioning is unfortunate as the news is for the Notre Dame football program that you're losing a 5-star caliber quarterback that had been basically committed to you for about a year. You have been in this position before where another former 5-star quarterback, Dante Moore, who more or less had given Notre Dame indication that he was going to publicize a decision in their favor in the 2023 cycle. That never happened. They threw out a couple offers in the summer of that year, but they ultimately went into the season, the 2022 season, without a quarterback committed in that high school senior class. They were able to get Kenny Minchie in the fold late. That was an unbelievable recruiting win for Notre Dame. It's kind of remarkable that they were able to pull that off. But so this is not unfamiliar territory for Marcus Freeman and Chad Bowden, and this is not an unfamiliar spot for Notre Dame either to have to flip a quarterback late in the cycle. They had to do it with Ian Book. I think Brandon Wimbush was the other guy. So as unfortunate as it is, they are prepared, and kind of just as Notre Dame was prepared, I was also prepared to fire off some names that I think Notre Dame should target to replace Knight in the 2025 cycle. That story is available at Blue and Gold, and I did share 6 names. There are also about a dozen others towards the end of the story that I considered highlighting for one reason or the other, but I did want to give 6 names to focus on, and I think that in my personal opinion, if Notre Dame does want to land a 2025 quarterback recruit, I think they need to go to SoCal to do it.
Not a bad place to, not a bad place to get any football player, I would say. Pretty good state that produces them there. Jack, before we get Kyle out of here, because Kyle was expecting to have a nice night off, maybe watch some playoff baseball tonight or something. He was not. Okay. Yeah, he said he was prepared for this.
Right now. Yeah, it's gonna be crazy.
Well, maybe you'll have some nights off after this recruiting cycle is finally finished. But that's, as I said earlier, a couple months. Jack, before we get him out of here and start talking some Notre Dame team stuff, you listen to all that. You got anything to add or anything you want to ask Kyle before we let him go?
Yeah, just one quick thing to add before we get on with the rest of the show. It's like, well, yes, it's definitely a good thing for Notre Dame that this happened now as opposed to 2 months from now. I think it's worth the reminder that, like, we've got comments that say, and I was talking about this on the board earlier today, like we've got comments that say, good riddance, we want guys who want to go to Notre Dame. And then, later in the show, people will complain that, Notre Dame keeps having to go to the transfer quarterback well, and that Notre Dame doesn't have the talent to compete with, the big dogs of the SEC. And to do that, to do both those things, to avoid going to the transfer QB well and to compete with these teams down south, you got to get players like Deuce Knight. And Deuce Knight was a, 6'5" quarterback with a big arm who runs a 4.5 40. I mean, that's the kind of upside and talent that you need at that position to compete with some of these best teams. So other than the timing, as in it happened now as opposed to 2 months from now, I don't see any way to spin this as a positive. It's definitely a blow for Notre Dame.
Yeah, as much work as Kyle does for us on the recruiting side of things, he's in the Notre Dame Stadium press box every Saturday. He watches the quarterback play. He's watched Deuce Knight as a recruit, I'm sure. And the last thing that we'll let him say is Deuce Knight would have looked good in a Notre Dame uniform, right, Kyle? And it would have been something that the Irish fans, had it happened, would have been thankful for. But now that it's not happening, it's kind of hindsight is 2020, and people become prisoners of the moment. But what can you do? What can you do, Kyle Kelly?
Yeah, I'll kind of wrap it up this way: is that I would say Notre Dame believed in Deuce Knight well before a lot of other programs. He had an early offer list, but I wouldn't say there was a program that really made a move for Deuce Knight like Notre Dame did. Like, for example, Tennessee was a school that Deuce Knight liked really early on in his recruitment. He even moved to Tennessee to play high school football there for a few weeks. But Tennessee had always prioritized George McIntyre, who was ranked higher at the time, I believe. But Deuce Knight has continued to ascend as he's gone throughout high school, and now he's a potential 5-star recruit. On3's kind of projecting him that way with the way they rank him. So yeah, this is a recruiting loss for Notre Dame, and Deuce Knight would have been a really good football player. But I think you also got to think about, well, if you were to sign to Notre Dame this cycle, if he was already having second thoughts now, can't imagine that he wouldn't have been having second thoughts if he were to end up on the Notre Dame roster with a guy like CJ Carr ahead of him, or even a Steve Angeli, or however that quarterback room would have shaken out. So it is an unfortunate recruiting loss for the Irish, but I think it's important to know, like I said earlier, this is, whether they like it or not, unfortunate territory, and I think that they can turn a negative out of positive, turn a negative into a positive, and find another future quarterback in this cycle.
Yeah, Band-Aid's finally been ripped off. That's the way I look at it, and it's time to let that heal and then get stronger from it. So, Kyle, we appreciate you, man. Obviously, you're probably going to be on here talking a lot more about this and where Notre Dame goes from here, but we appreciate you sharing your immediate thoughts with us on Hey Horka, man, for sure.
Take care, guys. Have a great rest of the show.
All right, thanks, Kyle. See you, man. Jack, yeah, I mean, like I think you wrapped it up nicely, and like I said, it's kind of like ripping a Band-Aid off, man. But to Kyle's last point there, that would have been a nice problem to have for Notre Dame to have Deuce Knight and Kenny Minchie if he's still around, CJ Carr, Steve Angeli, if you like that would have been a nice, younger than it is now quarterback room. Well, I guess it would have been the same age actually, but less experience, but like maybe more potential, because Riley Leonard, you kind of know what he is. You don't know what Steve Angeli could be. You don't know what CJ Carr, Kenny Minchie, Deuce Knight. It would have been a fun issue to have for Notre Dame, but now the issue is go get somebody else, right?
Yeah, and I think one of the reasons I thought people were a little irrational for saying that, like, they can just get another guy because CJ Carr's there. Like, CJ Carr being there, I think is even more reason to push all your chips into the Deuce Knight bucket, because you have a decent understanding at the very least of what CJ Carr's floor is. You're pretty confident that CJ Carr is going to be a solid starter. Go for the upside with the guy in this class, because you talk about Deuce Knight potentially leaving after a year or two. Whoever you sign in this class, like, what are the odds if CJ Carr ends up being a long-term starter that they don't transfer? The bottom line is also that, like, the majority of quarterbacks you sign are going to transfer in the year of our Lord 2024.
Yeah.
So I think no matter which way you spin it, there are certainly silver linings. Like we said, the timing. Like you said, with how committed really is Deuce Knight, and obviously he wasn't actually committed for the last couple of months. He was still deciding between Notre Dame and Auburn and Ole Miss and whoever else. But it's tough if you're a Notre Dame fan, even though you've pretty much known this was coming for a few months, to not be able to watch Deuce Knight in a blue and gold uniform, because that would have been pretty fun.
Yeah, pretty fun. You're looking at the numbers now if you're watching on YouTube. Consensus top 10 recruit. Like you don't get those all the time. On3's got him as the number 6 quarterback in the country. And the rest of the sites have him even higher than that. Like he could be consensus top 5. He's for sure consensus top 10. That's the type of talent that you're going to get. So don't be a prisoner of the moment and say, good riddance, I think is the words that you use, Jack. And you probably use those words from somebody on the message board, right? It's not. It's it's a tough loss for Notre Dame on the recruiting trail for sure.
It's also before we go into our ad read, I think it's important to remember that like this kid is 17 years old. 17-year-olds probably, I know when I was 17, I wasn't 100% confident. Every decision I make, let alone, and I'd never made a decision as important or as public as Deuce Knight's. And if you realize during the summer that he wanted to stay in the SEC, not much Notre Dame can do about that. And I also think that I'm sure on our message board, there's some animosity towards Deuce Knight. I know darn well in these YouTube comments that there is, but it's important to remember that this is a kid making a life decision. He's got a lot of family in the area near Auburn, probably a lot of friends as well. And it's just, sometimes it happens.
You know what else is a good life decision? Maybe a place that you can make some friends.
Amazing.
You can definitely bring home some good Notre Dame memorabilia. That's at Augie's locker room. So yeah, I mean, like I said last week, 3 straight Notre Dame home games in a row. Somehow we're down to the last of those, Stanford after the bye week. So if you guys are coming to the Stanford game, you've got to make time for Augie's locker room. We know you love Notre Dame memorabilia and unique one-of-a-kind Notre Dame items that you can only find at one place. That's Augie's locker room. Augie's locker room has moved to a new location as of last fall. Come see Augie at 1733 North Ironwood Drive in South Bend, right down the street from Notre Dame's campus. When you come for a game, maybe the Stanford game, maybe Florida State, and then Virginia, right? That's all we have left, I think, Jack. They have a wide selection of Notre Dame Stadium pieces, jerseys, helmets, autographs, and one-of-a-kind Rockney items. You can find exclusive Joe Montana signed items and famous sculptor Jerry McKenna's replicas of the bronze statues around the stadium. Augie gets new items all the time. If he doesn't have it in his store, he will find it for you. Visit Augie at 1733 North Ironwood Drive in South Bend and see the vintage helmet display dating back to 1890. He's got some amazing items. You want to see them, visit augieslockerroom.com or call him at 574-277-6363. One more thing before we get to what we had on the agenda, Jack. We had a super chat come through while Kyle was on. Knight hasn't been committed for months, so that's all he wants to say about that. Yeah. He's pretty much accurate in saying that. So let's use it as a segue to get into some team stuff real quick. We'll answer his question because he was kind enough, Carl Kramer, to pay us $4.99 for this. Are most positions up for grabs during the bye week? I feel like that's a question a lot of people ask, particularly the offensive line. I don't really see it that way, Jack. Like the season is a 12-game all-encompassing marathon sprint. It's a marathon, but you're sprinting, and these things are always being evaluated. It doesn't take a bye week to evaluate it. Sure, you might have a little bit more time to say, okay, is the 5 across the offensive line the 5 guys that we need to win football games? And maybe we see a change, but we're going to get to this later on in the show. I don't think there's going to be change for the sake of change, and like positions aren't up for grabs just because it's a bye week.
Yeah, no, I think at this stage of the season, I should say there isn't really a position that's truly up for grabs. There's certainly, like you said, always evaluating, always competing. That's one of the philosophies of Notre Dame and every good program. But as far as truly up for grabs, I think those are settled back in fall camp.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Now let's turn our attention to the defensive line before we go back to the offensive line, because those are 2 things on our agenda tonight. We've got a question from KCND MIS97 from the blueandgold.com loose emoji message board. It's pretty dire, but it's appropriate. Have we reached DEFCON 1 at Vyper if Boubacar Traore is out for the rest of the season? I believe the question was also framed in the context of, is there anything unique Notre Dame can do to mitigate the losses of Jordan Botelho and Boubacar Traore? I think we saw some of that last week, Jack. I'll get into that, but I'll give you the floor first. What is this Vyper situation right now?
Yeah, I think another part of the question was about Junior Tui Halamaka, which who we'll get into in a sec, because he's obviously a major part of this. I think you've probably reached DEFCON, maybe like DEFCON 1.5, because I think the big thing you lose with Boubacar Traore if he's out for the season, and I think we're operating under the assumption that he is, based on what we're hearing and what just what we saw on the field. I mean, the non-contact knee injury like that typically does not end well. So we're operating under that assumption. But I say DEFCON 1.5 because obviously it's horrible for Boubacar Traore and earlier Jordan Botelho, for the players themselves and for Notre Dame to lose them, because Boubacar, specifically about Boubacar, because we already talked about Botelho a few weeks ago, he had really been coming into his own. He was a monster. He's a physical freak. He had been playing. He'd been playing his butt off. He'd been defending the run, which is something we were concerned about earlier in his career and really honestly in fall camp. But he'd been this team's best pass rusher. I don't know if that's debatable right now. I think he leads the team in tackles for loss. It's a huge loss, but I say 1.5 and not 1 because I think Junior Tuli Halamaka has shown enough to be a capable replacement and not make that position a black hole. I think you need someone who you are confident can defend the run on early downs. I don't know how much Junior is going to play on passing downs, and we'll get into more of that when we talk about unique solutions. But I feel I don't know about if confidence is the right word. I feel pretty comfortable with Junior defending the run in early downs for Notre Dame.
The thing with me on that is before Miami, Ohio, I was not. Like, to me, Junior Tui Halamaka was where he was on the depth chart behind Boubacar Traore, a sophomore, because one, he doesn't rush the passer like Boubacar does. You just laid that out. And two, I think in all areas, he was just kind of a third string guy, honestly. And now it worries me that he's your first string guy. So it's tough to compartmentalize that because all you want to do is compare him to what Botelho was doing in the first 2.5 games of the season, what Boubacar was doing for the first 4.5. But I think you kind of have to do that. And you have to say, okay, what do we have now in comparison to what we just had? And to me, it's not nearly the same. And that's not just a Junior Tui Halamaka problem. That's a depth problem. Let's get into that now, Jack. What do you got behind him? Is it Logan Thomas as the number 2? Is it like, do you have to throw Jalen Sneed in there as the rush down, like pass rush down guy? Kingston Viliamuasa will probably start coming off the edge a little bit more. That's what worries me is it's the moving parts. You move a guy like Traore out of the equation who could do so many things. You got to move some other guys in. And it's going to be tough to make all of that work to me, Jack.
No, it's certainly tough. And like you said, like the pass rush upside, the every down upside, just Notre Dame needed a true difference maker on that defensive line for a while, especially at one of those edge rusher positions. And Boubacar Traore was that guy, and losing him really hurts. But I agree with you on Junior before these last 2 weeks. But now, I mean, he's played pretty well when he's been given opportunities, particularly against the run. And on early downs, I think you got to play him there for Notre Dame because you need someone who can hold the edge, like Botelho was doing, like Boubacar was doing. And I don't know if he can do it that well, but I think he's capable. Now on passing downs, I think next up is probably Logan Thomas, who had been a stud on special teams early in his career. I think he's already burned his red shirt, so that ship has sailed. And he got 13 reps in that game against Louisville, and those are obviously not throwaway reps. They needed every play of that game on defense.
Played more than Sneed in that game.
Yeah, he played more than Jalen Sneed in that game, and I don't know if this is something Notre Dame you're going to evaluate over the bye week and determine you want Jalen Sneed in that spot. But that's telling. Like, you thought Jalen Sneed would have been the perfect guy based on what they were saying early in the season to throw in there. Like, maybe Logan's not quite ready yet. I think Logan's about 224, 225 pounds right now. You throw Jalen Sneed in there, like, even maybe like have him eat a couple of cheeseburgers and convert him to Vyper full time, because they seem to not trust him right now at linebacker. And we got another question about the linebacker position. Like, I think their 3 best linebackers right now, particularly if Jack Kaiser can't go, he was hurt in the second half, have been Drake Bowen, Jaden Osbury and KVA. And
Yes.
frankly, maybe
Totally
even
agree.
maybe even if Kaiser is healthy. And I think it's probably in that order between Bowen, Osbury, and KVA, but it's close.
Yeah.
That's also why, like, yes, use Kingston as a pass rusher on third downs when they get throw in some of their more exotic looks. In terms of moving him to Vyper full time, I don't want to do that. I think he's been
Not a
playing
fan.
well at linebacker.
Not a fan of doing that. He's a linebacker, man. He's a great one.
So
I also think that Drake Bowen's been playing, like, overall in terms of what he's done and how much he's playing of the 5 linebackers. I think he's probably number 1. But in terms of, like, who down the line can do everything and play multiple positions, I think Kingston Viliamu-Asa is the most talented, high upside, high ceiling guy in the 5 that Max Bola continues to put on the field. And look,
sure.
he's a freshman. Like, he's way ahead right now of where Drake Bowen was as a freshman. Drake Bowen wasn't even in the equation. And I get it. Maris Leafau and JD Bertrand were here, and that made his circumstances different. But I don't think Drake Bowen as a freshman would be doing what Kingston Viliamu-Asa is doing. So
No.
do not disrupt that. Do not do to Kingston Viliamu-Asa what you did to Junior Tui Halamaka and took him out of the linebacker equation and put him on D. Junior Tui Halamaka for a full year and a half even, was just kind of floating and lost, and maybe lost some development time in that. Don't do that to KVA. Keep him in the linebacker spot. But look, if you know that you can get him on the edge and do something special in a certain matchup, then game plan for that for a week and say, yeah, we're going to put him in there, and 2-3 reps, we're going to kind of let him go. Just don't make it a full-time thing, right, Jack?
No, definitely not. I feel pretty comfortable putting KVA on the edge on passing downs. Like, you see that dip move he pulled against Louisville for the sack. That was not a lot of let alone freshmen. Not a lot of players in college football can do that. That is a highly advanced pass rush move that you can't do if you're not a supremely talented pass rusher. The bend off the edge that he showed. So I'm perfectly comfortable putting him there.
He almost
and,
got that shoulder on the ground, man. It was incredible.
Putting him there half the third downs in the game, I'd love to do that, but I think you have a really good thing going with KVA and Drake Bowen, and I know Osbury doesn't get as much buzz because he wasn't as highly ranked as a recruit, but he is playing some fantastic football this season. Like, whenever number 4 is out there, he makes plays. Notre Dame's defense seems to be better off for it. So you talk about the instincts. We had a comment about Snead not being who we thought he was, and like he just doesn't have the instincts. Osbury has those instincts, man. Osbury knows where to be before anyone else in the field. And I think that's why Jalen Steen's reps are down, and they need to at least kick around the idea of putting him at Vyper, because it's clear that they prefer Osbury, Bowen, and KVA, and obviously Kaiser at that linebacker spot right now.
So let's end the conversation with this first question with what you just said, Vyper. I mean, are we looking at Junior 75% of the time, and then Thomas, Snead, KVA, whoever you think kind of comes in those other unique situations? Or what's your split? Let's finish the conversation that way.
I mean, it just depends on, like, I mean, Notre Dame's defense is good enough that there are more pass downs than most, but I think it's just Junior run downs. Everyone else on pass downs.
Okay. Yeah, I'm for that as well. It's just unfortunate that we're talking about this, because Botelho was arguably the team's best defensive player through 2.5 games. And then you look at what Traore did in 4, like you were saying, oh man, he's kind of right up there with what Botelho was doing. And now you're probably without both of them. Just awful.
Yeah. Let's
switch to the other side of the line. Like we talked about the offensive line for a minute. We talked about the defensive line. We're going back to the offensive line from Aerofan 624. Is switching up the offensive line a worthwhile gamble, or is it too risky at this point? Not too risky. And I don't even know if it's a gamble. To me, you find your 5 best, and maybe that's what you do during this bye week, is kind of evaluate. Because, Jack, I watched the offense this week as we switch off back and forth for our rewatch series that we do at blueandgold.com. Rocco Spindler was not very good in this football game. Multiple false starts, and I get it, he was going against a really good defensive front, but I came away rewatching the game, and even a little bit in real time, thinking, Oh, I realized why Billy Schrauth won an offseason competition with him in the spring. It didn't even get to the summer. Like, it was over. This is a 10-game starter in Spindler we're talking about. And then I realized while he and Pat Coogan were battling to start at left guard, they ultimately said, you know what, we're going to go with the sophomore, Sam Pendleton, who's had his struggles. And I'm going to pull up some Pro Football Focus stuff in a minute. I'm going to give you the floor as well. But Jack, like when Schrauth comes back, and I don't know how quickly that's going to be, by the way, with some of the things that we've seen. We're not going to report too much on that. I mean, you could see it if you were at the game on Saturday. He's still wearing a pretty heavy-duty boot on that right ankle, I believe it is. And then, so like when he comes back, he's playing. And your only other option, well, I'll give you two options, I guess. You could put Spindler in over Pendleton at left guard, right, if that's what you felt was best. And then maybe you're looking at moving Gerby Lambert to the other tackle spot, because I don't think there's another tackle outside of Lambert that you could – it's Wagner, Knapp, Lambert. Tosh Baker is not playing because, that's just where he's at this point in his career. So of all the things that you could possibly do, is any of it worth doing? Let's get back to the crux of Arrow fans' question. Is any of that worth doing to you based on the personnel that that you have?
I mean, a lot of it depends on how ready you feel like Lambert is. And there's also, you have to have it in the back of your mind that like how much Anthony Knapp struggled early. He played, at least the PFF grades. I don't know what you saw in film, but I thought he played better against Louisville.
He was not the weakest link on that offensive line. I can tell you that.
I do think that the problem on this offensive line, and I think this was the most true against Louisville, is that it's not that you have obvious weaknesses, it's that you don't really have any obvious strengths. And I don't know if there's anything they can do right now to fix that. And I think a lot of people were a little dismissive of this in the preseason when a lot of others were like us were sounding the alarm bells, because like it's Notre Dame. You expect them to have a good offensive line, and they usually do, but the personnel and the experience level just wasn't at that point this year. I don't think there's anything they can do to really have a strong offensive line at this stage in the season. I think they need to make do with what they have. You obviously have to make the decision when Schrauth comes back, because he's coming back at some point.
Yeah.
To decide whether to take out Pendleton or Spindler. I probably lean towards taking Spindler back out, because I don't think anyone's really talked about this. Like, has Spindler played left guard since he's come in here? I remember him being mostly a right guard.
Yeah.
So I think that's a factor. If Pendleton is just better on that left side than Spindler, and like you said,
Rudolph is big on that too, right?
Yeah, and Rudolph's big on that, and like you said, there's not much you can do. Like you said, Spindler didn't have a great game against Louisville. You're not taking Emil Wagner out. I think Emil Wagner's been fine to pretty good.
Yeah.
You're not taking Pat Coogan out because he's your only capable center right now.
And he's been good.
Yeah, and he's been good. And you obviously have to put Billy Schrauth back in at that left guard spot. So, or right guard, excuse me. So the decisions you have to make are: do you put Gerby Lambert in at left tackle? And that's a risk because, again, the experience factor. But if you think Anthony Knapp's not getting it done, you at least have to explore the idea.
I don't think you're worried about killing any kid's confidence either. Like, look what Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler did to get back in the starting lineup. Maybe because Anthony Knapp is so much younger, do you think replacing him with another true freshman, somebody that came in 6 months after you arrived on campus? I saw somebody in the comments say the only reason Emil Wagner's not playing football right now is because he didn't come in as an early enrollee. It's very possible. Or Gerby Lambert, excuse me. He didn't come in as an early enrollee. Very possible. But like, is there anything to cohesion, chemistry? Anthony Knapp is our first 5 game. He started the first 5 games at left tackle. Are we really going to do this to him? I think that's what Arrow fans getting at the question too. Is like, does that risk messing anything good that it hasn't been great, but anything good that Notre Dame's been doing along the offensive line? You just throw this curveball. Do things start going curvy as a result?
Yeah, no, I think it's a risk, and I think things are already pretty curvy, but you risk them getting curvier. It's just it's not a good situation up front. We knew it wouldn't be as soon as Charles Jagasaw went out for the season. And that's the fact of the matter. Like, you already weren't confident in this offensive line before fall camp started. And since then, you lost the three people who pretty much everyone in and around the program believed were the three best offensive linemen. So there's not much you can do to salvage that situation and make it a really good offensive line, but you just have to do what you can to make the best of it.
All right, so I mentioned some Pro Football Focus stuff. Obviously, sample sizes really come into play, but I basically went and looked at season-long grades for everybody, and this is the Notre Dame offense. So Pat Coogan's sample size is actually really big at this point, and there's only 3 players who are above an 80, which we would call elite to very good Pro Football Focus season-long grade. Steve Angeli, Kevin Bauman, Jeremiah Love. Pat Coogan in 137 snaps is number 4 in the Notre Dame offense of all the offensive players with his 74.7 grade. So he's in there. Like you said, Jack, you're not removing him from center. Ashton Craig's out for the season. Pat Coogan is your center. There's Billy Strouth at number 9 with a very respectable 71.2 over 139 snaps. When he comes back, he's your right guard. I believe Emil Wagner is in this next group, which you would call slightly above average to average as you descend. Yeah, 14. That's not bad. 66.6. You would call 60 average. He's above average. He's played 297 snaps. You're not removing him from this equation. There's somebody else on this list in the offensive line, Jack, if you can see that. Number 12, it's only 38 snaps, but Sullivan Absher has the best pass blocking grade of any Notre Dame player. I think he's a name that we have to throw. If you're looking at that left side of the line and thinking that's where we need to do something, you're thinking, okay, Strouth comes back. It's either Pendleton or Spindler, who has never played on the left side, like you said, Jack. Maybe Absher is a guy that's a diamond in the rough, out of nowhere, comes in and is better than Pendleton. I'm not so sure about that because you would probably know it by now. But here we get to the below average to bad, and this is why we're having this conversation. Sam Pendleton is just below average, 59.9. Rocco Spindler, 58.8, coming in and playing 2.5 games. And then look at Anthony Knapp at left tackle. That is with the very good game that he just played against Louisville per Pro Football Focus, the same source that I'm getting these numbers right now. He's got a season-long pass blocking grade of 38. Jack, time and again, he's a kind of a turnstile. And that's the same reason Tosh Baker's not playing, right? So if you're going to toot the Derby Lambert horn, this bye week is probably the best time to do it. I know a lot of fans are, but look, I see both sides of it. I see leaving Knapp in there and letting him learn. I also see, hey, maybe Lambert has finally figured it out coming in as a summer enrollee, and he's the guy that can ascend and elevate Notre Dame's play along the left side of the line.
Yeah, I generally subscribe to the school of thought that, like, you don't bench someone coming off their best game, and I think Knapp's coming off his best game.
Yep.
So if you make that change, you don't make it now. You definitely keep it in your back pocket for the future. But like with people complaining about Knapp, like, what did you expect? He's a true freshman who came in at like 260 pounds less than a year ago, and you're asking him to block the likes of Nick Scorton and Ashton Gelati. Like, that's just an impossible ask for a true freshman. And Notre Dame, I'm not saying Notre Dame had a choice in the matter, but you can't blame the player for something that the team messed up, and that bad luck messed up when Charles Jagasaw went down.
Absolutely. So that's kind of where we're at with the offensive line. Dang if you do, dang if you don't type of situation. To your point, in all of that time that we just spent talking about it, Jack, I think the smartest thing that you said, smartest thing that either of us said is this is kind of the situation. We knew that it was probably going to be that before the season started. One game against Texas A&M where there were some mishaps in that game along the offensive line, but there was enough to say, oh, man, this is going to be peaches and roses and sunshine and rainbows. Got a little over our skis. This is the group that Notre Dame's working with up front, right? And you kind of have to live with it. And thank God you have a mobile quarterback. How about that for a segue, Jack? We're full of them tonight. Is Riley Leonard the quarterback you thought he'd be after watching his Duke film? A reminder for everyone watching this, if you're not subscribed at blueandgold.com. Me and Jack watched all 21 of Riley Leonard's starts at Duke over the offseason, poured through the film, saw every throw, saw the way he reacted to everything that happened in every single one of those games, the way he ran the ball, all of those things. So, Jack, we've seen 5 games of Riley Leonard at Notre Dame, really 4.5, because he was so good in one of those games. He only needed to play a half. I think I need to remind everyone of that. Is he the same guy? Is he better? Is he worse? Has he regressed? How do you feel?
Well, it very much depends on the game. Like against NIU,
Yeah.
I think he was worse than we'd ever seen him.
Yep.
At
That was the worst I've ever seen.
Yep.
And we watched 21 games. I completely agree with that, Jack. Worst I've ever seen Riley Leonard look. And it had a lot to do with the fact that he didn't have one rushing attempt in the second half. That is not who he is.
Correct. And I think we can all agree he was playing hurt in the second half. And like with A&M, like it's kind of hard to evaluate because truly nothing he did that night was going to matter except getting the win, which he did. And that was to some extent who he was at Duke, and that like he's not going to be perfect, but he's the guy you want with the game on the line. And that's a big reason he was acquired. Purdue is also very hard to evaluate just because Purdue is so unfathomably bad on defense that it's just hard to evaluate anything. But he ran well. Miami started slow, but by the end of the game, that game was about who he was at Duke. Louisville, he was definitely, I think that the Louisville version of Riley Leonard is probably about what he was at Duke. In that he's going to run well, he's going to run tough, he's going to make the right reads, he's going to throw on the run, he's going to be accurate short, and he's going to get the job done, win the game. And when push came to shove, that's what he did early when things got dire. That's what he did late when things weren't looking great, and Louisville was knocking on the door. I think we're at the point right now where Riley Leonard is about who he was at Duke, and that's improvement because he wasn't that in week 2. So you hope for Notre Dame that the improvement stays linear, which it is not always, and that he gets better after the bye.
I want to go back to what you said about the Louisville game because I completely agree with that. And I want to invite, the people who are watching this to kind of give their thoughts on, and I'm going to ask you in a minute too, Jack, if that's who he is and he barely accounts for 200 yards of offense, and I know you're not a huge stats guy, but let's bring into the picture, like the bigger picture of Notre Dame's season. Is that enough to, like, you watched Alabama, Georgia later that night, right? Did you see any of it?
No, of course not. And I think some of that's not his fault. Some of that is, it's hard to play offense when your offensive line is getting its butt kicked, and it got its butt kicked in the second half.
Yeah.
I think we saw this in Jeremiah Love's performance too, by the way. Jeremiah Love averaged 3 yards a carry in this game.
We talked about that in our post-game stand-up. Yeah. That's a tough game. It's not a numbers game. It's a go win the football game, and they did.
But again, like you have to hope as a Notre Dame fan, this was always the plan. They knew it wouldn't be pretty early. They just didn't anticipate it making them lose to NIU or it taking this long. But I think we've said before so many games this season, because it's just been that kind of year, that we're going to learn a lot about this team. We're really going to learn a lot about this team and this quarterback against Stanford, because I think you really started. I know many of you have already broken the panic button at this point, but you really start hitting the panic button if he doesn't look better, if he God forbid regresses against Stanford, because Stanford, well, they're not pushovers on defense. I don't think they or really anyone is worse than Purdue, but they're a defense you should be able to throw on, and you should be able to move the ball and score on with consistency. And if he's not consistent, that's when I start getting really concerned.
So consistency tends to coincide with accuracy, and he completes 73.9, whatever it was, almost 75% of his passes against Louisville. I think people get so caught up in that final number of passing yards, which I don't even know what it is off the top of my head, but I know it wasn't even 175, maybe, Jack, something like that.
I want to say like 7-something yards per attempt.
Yeah, but just 7-something yards per attempt. Yeah, 17 of 23 for whatever it was. Look, at the end of the day, he hits the 34-yarder to Jaden Greathouse, and he waits for that to come open because there's a single high safety over the top. As soon as the safety goes with one of the guys, I saw Riley Leonard, who was comfortable and confident in the pocket, who was going to throw it to the right guy, and he did. And then he made the right throw to Jeremiah Love for that touchdown. Didn't turn the ball over. That's the Riley Leonard at Duke. That's why they won 9 games in 2022 at a place that doesn't normally win 9 games. I think maybe they've won 10 once, I believe, and they They've only hit 9 a couple times. Riley Leonard is responsible for one of those couple of times. So the idea was you bring a guy that could do that there into Notre Dame, and all of a sudden he has the best year of his career. But I've got news for you guys. Was Sam Hartman the same guy at Notre Dame that he was at Wake Forest? No, he was not throwing for 40 touchdowns or 4,000 yards and all that stuff. You change the surroundings, you add in some pressure. The Notre Dame offensive line, somebody just said it. Riley's been getting better. The O-line has been getting worse. That's probably true. The wide receivers, the tight ends, like Mitchell Evans is still working back, and you can tell. And Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan haven't really made that jump as pass catchers. The wide receivers, Chris Mitchell is non-existent. I don't know if that's because it's things that he is or isn't doing, or just it's a Notre Dame thing. Somebody said we're not talking about this. I'm getting it. We're not talking about this question, but it was asked at Hey Horka. Hey, why does it happen for other people where a wide receiver can just go off? Other programs, it just doesn't happen at Notre Dame. Jack, we're through 5 games in the season, and Bo Collins is leading this team with 17 catches for 181 yards and 1 touchdown. That's one game at a really good program. Like really good programs have a guy that can do that in one game. Notre Dame does not. I don't have a really good answer for why. Like I said, it's just like a Notre Dame thing, but Riley Leonard has been sucked into that. He's in this vortex of pressure and all these things. It happened to Sam Hartman. It's happening to Riley Leonard. Riley Leonard still has time to win the rest of these games and save that in a way that Sam Hartman didn't. But I'm just drawing that comparison because they're two totally different quarterbacks, but they're facing very, very similar things. And I don't think that it's all either of theirs fault. Like there's a lot of things going on here.
Yeah, for sure. It's not all the wide receivers' fault. It's not all the offensive line's fault. It's not all Mike Denbrock's fault. It's just a lot of things that have either gone wrong or just haven't been perfect. Like, I don't think watching the tape, I don't think the receivers have been bad. I think they're to some extent not making some of the plays they should. And to some extent are just victims of a bad passing offense. And Riley Leonard is to some extent not making the plays he should. And to some extent, sometimes the receivers aren't open. And the offensive line.
Yeah, it seems like it's never all happening at
once,
right?
The offensive line sometimes is not protecting well, and sometimes the quarterback's failing from clean pockets. It's just, or sometimes the offensive line's not run blocking well, and sometimes Jadarian Price just tries to bounce everything outside. And it's just.
Or fumbles at the 10-yard line.
This is something that you need to fix over the bye week because you just need to get this thing in sync, and you're running out of time to do it. And that's again a big reason why you really hope that they look good against Stanford, because that would give you some confidence that they can run the table here, which is what they need to do.
You just led us into the segue this time, Jack. How does Notre Dame fix this passing game during the bye week? Again, bye weeks are not cure-alls. I said it earlier in a different context. It's not like Notre Dame magically finds its passing game touch in this bye week, but to me, Jack, the answer is pretty simple. And again, nobody fell in love with the numbers, but what Notre Dame did in the passing game against Louisville and even kind of Miami, Ohio to an extent, the pass interferences, that was the next step we saw Riley Leonard taking, throwing the ball downfield. You just kind of build off of those things. And I will add one more, the sprint outs. If Riley Leonard isn't airmailing the ball 10 yards over a guy's head, which he was not doing at Louisville, he was putting it on the money. He's the prototypical sprint out quarterback, Jack, because you can't catch him. And if it's set up for him to run, he can run off of that. It's like a true RPO. So I think that's a big part of it. And then it's just gelling all of this, man. Like we said, try to just somehow get everything to come together, because you got this piece there, that piece there. If they're all together, I think all of a sudden maybe you see Riley Leonard have his best passing game in a Notre Dame uniform.
Yeah, it's a lot of what we talked about the last segment. There is one material change I would make though, and that's featuring Mitchell Evans more. I would make a
How do you do that?
Effort.
How do you like?
I think you make more of an effort to hit him up the seam, and a lot of that has to come with Mitchell Evans getting healthy and more comfortable. Which again, you like the bye week is not a silver bullet, but you would hope that he can do that during the bye. I think someone on Hey Horka said Mitchell Evans has mostly run out routes this year, and that's
I saw it in Louisville game during the rewatch. I mean, he is a 3-yard, 5-yard out merchant right now, and
that's not where Mitchell Evans is most dangerous. Mitchell Evans is most dangerous up the seam. So here's an idea: run empty, and they can't They can't spread everything out. They can't spread the defense out too much because then you run the risk of Riley Leonard running all over you. So do that. Put Jeremiah Love somewhere. Make him like a wing or a bubble threat. Something where you need to account for him. Spread everyone out. Put everyone else to the outside. Try to get Mitchell Evans matched up one-on-one in the linebacker. Because if you do that, you don't even need to make a totally accurate throw if you Riley Leonard. Against Miami of Ohio, you got him matched up on Salopek, who's one of the best linebackers in the country. And the only thing you do is interfere with him. And Riley made a good throw, and it would have been caught if he wasn't interfered with. So, like, you get Mitchell Evans matched up on a linebacker, and I know it is not as simple as I'm making it sound. And Mike Denbrock is a whole heck of a lot smarter of an offensive mind than I am. I should know. I coordinate the offense of a flag football team. It is really hard.
You guys won this last weekend, though.
The Steelers are on a winning streak, and we have a good game plan for next week. Anyway, so I would try to get Mitchell Evans those matchups and really use him kind of like he was used last year. Because if you get Mitchell Evans one-on-one on a linebacker, and you make even a semi-accurate throw, because Mitchell Evans has a great catch radius and he gets everything. So I don't think Mitchell Evans has really dropped anything this year.
He showed last year that he can make incredible one-handed catches over the middle as well.
Yeah, he catches everything. Like when he's been targeted, he looks like a similar guy. He just hasn't been targeted that much. So if you hit him up the seam, you're either going to get a catch or a pass interference if he's in one-on-one coverage. And I think that's like the receivers haven't been great, but I also don't think they're bad. I just think there's not a true number one on this team. You treat Evans like a true number one, and you start hammering him over the middle. All of a sudden, that could open things up for everyone else. That could give Jaden Greathouse more space to operate. That could give Bo Collins more one-on-one matchups. Maybe that gives Chris Mitchell chances over the top, because like when he said chances over the top, he wasn't not open in that NAU game they underthrew him. He would have caught a touchdown against Miami, Ohio if he wasn't interfered with. So maybe that gives him opportunities. Maybe that gives Jaden Harrison or Jordan Faison more opportunities underneath when they're healthy. I think the key, and you have to pray that Mitchell Evans feels like the Mitchell Evans of old next week. But I think the key is really, really, really targeting Mitchell Evans.
It kind of felt like, and it stinks because Notre Dame took that loss, but it always felt like with Evans, it was, get him along until that bye week and then unleash him Stanford and beyond for 7 games. And he's played more than that. It hasn't seemed like it because the numbers aren't there. I think he's caught 10 passes for like 80 yards or something. But he's played about as much as you'd expect a tight end number one to play. But if you can do the things that you're talking about, Jack, that's a different type of playing. Like I think he's played in part because Eli Raridan and Cooper Flanagan have been what they've been. Obviously,
one of them been hurt recently.
Flanagan going out is what I was about to say. But if he becomes a fixture of the passing offense, it's a totally different deal for everyone involved in this passing offense. So my quick answer and the longer answer that Jack gave is Mitchell Evans, man. Use Mitchell Evans. He's like a state. He was almost a given for us. Like it was. Even though he's coming back from the knee injury, insert him. He's going to be the guy, and he hasn't been that, and it showed. And it's not to his fault. But Notre Dame needs that, and I think we can end that discussion right there and move on to our final question. We just talked about injuries. We went like 5 for 5 on segues, or 6 for 6 if you go all the way back to the Deuce Knight stuff at the beginning of this. So Cooper Flanagan talked about his injury. There's been a lot of injuries, Jack. Too many for me to name off the top of my head. I know you're better at this stuff than I am, but you mentioned Charles Jagasaw beginning of the year. Obviously, we had the conversation about Botello, Traore. You see Benjamin Morrison leave the game for a minute. Christian Gray doesn't play because of a shoulder strain. Josh Burnham's been dealing with an ankle thing. Ashton Craig goes out for the year with a knee. Billy Shrout is dealing with an ankle thing. A lot of injuries, and that always begs the question, and it had to be Irish Chef 3, who's a great poster, mind you, who comes up and says, what's your honest assessment of all of these injuries? Is Lauren Landau to blame? A lot to blame? A little? Not at all? Where does he fall in this? The injuries, Jack. Just open floor, open mind. What do you got on all these injuries, man? Because it's a lot.
To answer the question, I lean towards not at all. Because I know everyone's face. This is one of the things I've learned. I didn't know this was a thing before I started covering Notre Dame. everyone's favorite game is blame the strength coach for injuries.
Yeah.
I think I guess that's human nature to want somebody to blame. If we want to have a broader societal discussion on this, we can after the show.
And I will say real quickly, and I'm giving away my answer after yours. Blame the human body, man. It's a flawed mechanism. I've had surgery on this shoulder. It still doesn't feel very good. Lower back. I'm only 29 years old. Blame the human body. Jack, keep going.
Yeah, we can get really nihilistic on this if we want to. But I think like early this season, we were singing Orlando's praises for good reason, because his job is not to be. I'm going to use the phrase silver bullet again. His job is not to be a silver bullet against injuries. That's just straight up not what he's supposed to condition the team to guard against injuries. But those are injuries like pulled hamstrings.
Yes.
Or people on the beat were telling me about a few years ago where like 5 linemen wound up with like broken 5th metatarsals, which is a symptom of overuse and potentially Under Armour cleats. But it's
a different conversation, Jack.
Yeah, it's a different conversation. I think these aren't soft tissue injuries. These aren't like overuse injuries. These are football happens injuries. Like they're just they're football happens. Like people tear their ACLs when they play football. I tore my ACL playing football.
There you go. Get in on the conversation, Jack.
People sprain their ankles. Like that's not something a strength coach can prevent. Like it would be one thing. Like last year, 2 of the wide receivers had their seasons destroyed by hamstring injuries. I'm not saying that was the strength coach's fault, but like that's the more compelling case for it being the strength coach's fault. But I think given the way they played in the A&M game and the way they outlasted A&M at their own house in their own conditions, like I don't see any reason not to give Lauren Lando props for what he's done this season.
That's a strength coach win for sure. What happened down there? You didn't see any Notre Dame players throwing up. I know that's cliche at this point, but you saw some A&M players throwing up. Greg Wasserman, shout out to you, man. The human body is a biomechanical disaster. Overall poor design. I agree. It's like a lemon of a car, basically. Sometimes you get the Ferrari and you know you're never going to have any issues with it. That like kudos to the owner of that car. But most of us have the one that needs to go in for an oil change after 2,000 miles, when normally it's like 5 to 7 or whatever. So most of us get that car, or the engine breaks down, or, all the different. I'm not a car guy, but I know there's so many different things. That's the human body. And that's my answer to this question. You're asking the human body to do things that it was never meant to do when you play football. Jack, I was up there in the press box right next to you and Kyle Kelly, who we started the show with. And when Traore went down, in my mind, and I didn't want to say this with a bunch of like football people around. I'm a football guy. I love football. That's why I'm on here with you guys right now. It's what, it pays my salary. But I was sitting up there thinking, man, these guys who 77,000 people are just rooting everything they've got for right now are doing something where every single time they go out there, they're going to set back their bodies 6+ months. And if that's what Boubacar Traore is facing right now, the mental wear and tear of that, I mean, you hear all these stories coming back from an ACL or some significant injury. It's no fun, but it's what happens. It's sometimes the price that some of these people have to pay for what we love so much. It's tough, man. It's a juxtaposition that sucks. But look, if Traore comes back and he's the same guy or better, that's the success story that you love. That is, hey man, he went through it. He did it. Jordan Botelho can even come back. I don't know if we talked about that last week. I think it was one of the big base.
We talked about this.
Yeah, that was a Thursday thing.
Yeah,
so we haven't talked about that on Hey Horka. He could have his Notre Dame success story. So it sucks, but it's not Lauren Landau's fault that these guys' knees are crumpling under the pressure. Like these are big dudes, and ligaments can only handle so much. That's the way I understand it.
Yeah. But bottom line, again, everyone's favorite game is blame the strength coach. I don't blame the strength coach for these.
No, I give props to the strength coach for doing everything else that he does. It's not just strength coach; it's strength and conditioning coach. And for all intents and purposes, what we've seen, this is a very well conditioned football team. It's a banged up football team. That's not Lauren Landau's fault. So, Jack, that'll about do it, man. This was a lot of Deuce Knight, but a lot of really good Notre Dame football stuff as well. I'm glad we were able to bring all y'all that during the bye week. But as we said with Kyle Kelly, bye weeks are not really bye weeks because there's still so much to do and talk about. But I know that you're taking some time off, dude. Enjoy it. I think everyone watching this video wants you to enjoy it as well. Maybe you see another Texas A&M loss in the same building that you already saw a Texas A&M loss this season. I don't know if you want to tell anyone about that, or they can make their own assumptions of where you're going and who you're rooting for this week.
Yeah, it's getting a little awkward because increasingly Notre Dame fans should probably want Texas A&M to win this game, but yeah. I will be headed back to College Station to watch my alma mater play against the Aggies this week. See some longtime college friends I'm really excited about. So if you're in College Station for whatever reason, come say hi, and yeah, that's what I'll be doing this weekend.
See, Jack is a football guy. He can't get enough football, so he's going to go down and watch some more this week. Hey, if Texas was playing a game this week, I would do the same. I always use it as an opportunity, Notre Dame's bye week, to go hang out with my friends, family, go see some more football in a different capacity than we normally see it and talk about it and write about it and whatnot. We don't do the talking and writing about it as much when we go for fun, but enjoy it, man. I'm going to enjoy my bye week back in South Bend, just getting some sleep. Enjoying the nice weather that we're having here as well. So we appreciate all you guys being on here with us. And as always, we will see you next Wednesday night.